All right, we golden? Okay. How many of you know what a Therblig is? You've heard the term before. Okay, good. I wanted to see lots of shaking heads going, no, what in the heck is she talking about? Because that gives me a chance to just flim-flam you all over the street. No, that's not what I'm here for. A Therblig was a notion developed in the early 1900s for improving the performance of industrial workers. What on earth does that have to do with Perl? Well, I'll show you. But up front, a little bit of introduction. For those of you who do not know me, I am Ruth Holloway. My pronouns are she and they. Any combination is fine. I work currently for Clearbuilt, based in Atlanta. The rest of the Clearbuilt team is all on row 2 here, sitting around Joelle. And we're very happy to be a Perl shop. Our back end is all Perl. The front end is all JavaScript and lots of cool treachery out there. And 40-year career in IT. I've been doing this. I am, in fact, quite a bit older than the internet. We figured that out last session, that I am quite a bit older than the internet. And in all of that time, along the way, I picked up bits and pieces of how to make things work better. And I've always been kind of interested in the notion of how do we improve efficiency and performance incrementally? Because it's less costly to do it in an incremental way if you've got the time and the headspace to do so than it is to have a giant project with a whole herd of people trying to fix the performance of a massive application. How do we do it piecemeal? So that's kind of been an interest of mine in the development world. There's some things that this talk is not about that I need to get out the door up front. This is not a benchmarking tool. Do not attempt to use the method I'm about to show you to evaluate the performance of a great big code base and try to put some little number on it that you can sell to nerds. All right, y'all remember the PC nerds of like the 90s and 2000s who were like spewing numbers at each other off of these benchmarks? And they even got made fun of in the commercials and stuff because, yeah, this will not do that for you. It's not what it's for. It's not mathematically based. There's no math involved here, Walt. There's no math here. This is intuitive. This is made to supplement your skill as a developer and to enhance it. It's not a rule book. There's more than one way to do everything, just like in, well, you know, everything in Perl. There's plenty of choices of ways to do this. This is not a management tool. Let me say it again for the managers in the back who are not listening and are thinking, oh, this will be a great way to evaluate my developers. Look, lines of code sucks as an evaluation metric. So does this. Don't do it. If you do, your karma will suck. Your developers will hate you. Doors will not open for you. Children will run from you and you will itch. And I will give you lots of grief about it. What it is an intuitive, language-independent tool for markup and incremental performance improvement of existing code that can be used while developing new code to do early optimization. Now, what do I mean by that? At Clearbuilt, we have long espoused, longer than I've been there even, write it, make it work, optimize later. And as long as your application stays below a certain size, that works fine. What this tool will let you do is catch some of the low-hanging fruit while you're creating that new code so you don't have to later at relatively low cost. If it takes you 10 more minutes to optimize a loop and make it a little faster, then you save the 20 minutes that you're going to have to do 6 months down the road when the app gets bigger. It's little stuff. How do we do this a little at a time? Now, what's a Therblig? This is Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. As you might surmise, the name of a Therblig is their name rearranged, partly backwards. Frank was a manager of a bricklaying company before he went into academics. He was a working man, right? His wife was an academic. All of their papers, she didn't appear on it until after she got her second doctorate. Her first doctorate they wouldn't award to her because she never fulfilled the residency requirement. So she went and got a second doctorate, and after that her name appeared on all their papers. This is their paper in 1911, Motion Study, a method for increasing the efficiency of the workman. And they came up with the field of time motion study. They said if an assembly line worker or a bricklayer or any other kind of physical work person is having to make a bunch of extra moves that are inefficient, we can make them work better and profit more, make more money. That's what it's all about, right, Joel? By streamlining those movements. And they came up with 16, and then there have been 2 added since, that are the basic motion elements of an industrial worker's job. And they're things like search, find, preposition, release, rest, avoidable delay, that kind of thing. And they even came up with a markup language. This clip is from Wikipedia that shows the 18 basic moves. Now, some of these are much more efficient for the final output you want than others. And that's very much industry dependent. But things like avoidable delay is one of the least efficient in almost all of them. So what they do is they go into watch industrial workers and they make these little marks to describe how they're doing their job and all the little moves they had to make. And the idea was to thin down the number of the inefficient ones and thin down the total number as much as you could so that that worker could get the most work done in a shift, right? Minimize the number of Therbligs, especially the ineffective ones, the ones that don't produce the output you want. Well, Robert Heinlein wrote this in his book, Time Enough for Love. And this is actually where I bumped into the term the first time and had to go look it up. And I'll tell you, I had to go look it up in World Book Encyclopedia because I am, in fact, older than the internet. And at the time, I didn't understand it. I came back to that a few years ago, bumped into that word again, and Wikipedia told me so much more. And there's a vast amount of information about what is a Therblig. Well, Robert Heinlein said that we should minimize our Therbligs until stuff becomes automatic. Our life gets automated by thinning down the number of Therbligs. And that gives you more time to enjoy butterflies, kittens, and rainbows and the people around you and whatever, right? So to myself, I'm thinking, well, what if you could apply this idea to code? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, do we need a markup language? Well, it might be handy, so I scribbled one up. So I came up with a few basic coding Therbligs. And basic, I mean, I'm not talking about the language now. Don't start. This is language independent. Here they are. We're going to spend a little time explaining these in just a moment. These are the ASCII emoticons that I use if I'm working in a text editor, such as my IDE. You can use them in Vim if you're, that old. You can even use them in Emacs if you're one of those benighted heathens who still does that. If you're one of those who uses, modern emojis, here's a set that I suggest has a possibility. You can use anything you like. If you don't like one of these emojis for your own work, knock yourself out, man. Change it. I'm not patenting this, Okay, so what are these kinds of operations? Local lightweight operations are things that are happening within your compiler or within your language application, your language interpreter, like in Perl, that are intrinsic, that you can't change on its own, and that are fast, lightweight, because they're only doing one thing. Think addition, subtraction, multiplication, logical operators, copying things from one variable to another, those kinds of operations, as opposed to local heavyweight operations, which are things that are going to execute several operations and are a shortcut for something bigger that you could do another way. Think map, grep. All right, map and grep are going to go through some loops to do their job, but you can't do anything about what's in that loop, right? You can't really affect that it's going to do that and how it's going to do that, because that you're not on P5P, right? If you're on P5P, then yeah, you can do something about it, but only for everybody, right? Local heavyweight operations, that's what those are. The big hefty things that your language can do that you really can't have a lot of influence over. Inter-process black box operation. This could be your database if your database is on the same hardware. We're talking the same hardware. Now, if you're running IPC Locker, this is your Locker D on the same hardware. Not all of these are going to be the same weight. A Locker D is going to be super lightweight because you're going to ask for a lock, you're going to release a lock, you're going to check and see if there is a lock. Those are the only three things it knows how to do. Whereas PostgreSQL is a much heftier black box. But if it's local, it's still inter-process because you're not having to deal with all that stuff that Joel just talked about. All right. The last one is the network black box operation. There where, as well as the black box that you're trying to do, you also have to deal with the wires and the fibers and the Joels of the world to make things happen. And there is built-in overhead and latency because, okay, well, I'm going to send a request to this server over there at Dave's shop, and it's got to go over, 300 miles of wire. And then, however he's got his server set up, and I've got an Apache to go through, and da-da-da-da. All that built-in overhead adds to the weight of this operation. So, from lightest to heaviest, there they are. All right? Now, I found it very useful to have a marker for the begin and end of a loop, because loops multiply Therbligs fast. Everything that happens inside the loop is going to happen on every iteration of the loop. So if you've got a big herking fat loop with a whole bunch of operations in it, you might see that as a spot where you might be vulnerable to performance problems. So I thought those would be useful. And then the percent sign, think of a nose of a pig. That's a potential memory hog. So I make a database request and I'm going to ask for Dibix class objects back. And my request is worded in such a way that I might end up with every record in the database. Or everything in this one table. Give yourself a marker for that. And so hey, this is something, I got to watch out for this because this could be a really big beast because of that. Now, if your server has, 64 gig of RAM, that may or may not be an actual problem. But it is a place where you might watch for a problem. All right, I created some modifiers because all of these are very relative. A logical operator is a little heavier than string concatenation. Map is heavier than grep for some processors some of the time. All right. I don't even know which one is which and which servers, but you may experimentally find after a time that it's cheaper to do one than the other. So these are all relative to others of the same type. So I created some modifiers for use within a block of code. One may be heavier or lighter than another one nearby of the same type. The tilde means that under some circumstances this may be true, but not necessarily all. And then question mark is, I don't really know. Maybe we need to find out. And that's just, then you just go grep in your code for question marks. Look for a question mark in parentheses. I need to figure out, is this where my performance problem is? And that's part of why I say this is not a rule book. This is intuitive. You still got to use your brain here. Okay? Mark up some code? Okay, I've got a little piece of JavaScript here. I told you in the outline this is going to include JavaScript and Perl. Here's the JavaScript. Now in this case, I'm making an AJAX request to an API, presumably, but not necessarily on another server. We're going to count it that way for this go round. It's a post request and I've got some data I'm sending. I'm not going to cache anything. I need this data back live and I'm doing some kind of a search and it's going to find matches. We can infer that. And probably it's sending things like a fraction of a name, which you've input in a box. You know where I swiped this from, don't you? And when it's done, we're going to mark up the results into an HTML table and output them and do something else with them. All right, let's mark that up. We have a network black box. When we're done, we have potentially something hefty, maybe. And then I'm doing a couple of really simple operations, and then I have a loop with a simple and a potentially heftier object when we're creating the new date object in JavaScript. Now, since date is built into the language, that's not too heavy, and it's an internal. If you're building an object out of a separate library, that may not be the same thing. If you were calling C from Perl, for instance, add some overhead. That would be a little heavier because there's that overhead of the call. And then at the end, I'm just spitting that out into the HTML. Well, gosh, that looks pretty good. That's, but here's the case that brought this whole thing around. Here's what brought this whole idea to my mind. A very, 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 very common thing that happens to me in my current job. We write these applications. We don't really optimize much to start out. We deploy it. 6 months down the road, when they've got a bunch of data in this database that we built, after we've done testing it with 2 records, then all of a sudden, this one page gets really, really slow. And they pick up the phone and call our support line, which, by the way, apropos of nothing whatever, also happens to be our CEO. And he, clever fellow that he is, and knowing that I'm really good at this kind of stuff, will, as the second thing he does after hearing that message me and say, Ruth, could you take a look at this route and see if you can figure out why it's running slow? That's the second thing he does after they tell him that. You know what I'm looking for, Tracy. Give it to me. What? He hangs up the phone. We're talking about Therbligs here. Every move counts, right? Okay. Thank you, Matt. Love you. Thank you. All right. So that kind of brought this whole thing to mind because this is a common task for me. I get this kind of stuff a lot because it turns out that I'm pretty good at it, especially on the back end, but I ain't bad on the front. Now, this piece of code looks pretty good. But if Neil called me, I would look at both the back end and see how fast the back end's running, which is real easy to do in a Dancer app because I can see when the response was received by Dancer and when the result was sent back out from the logs because I turned my logging level up. And I see the back end is, snapping fast. I'm happy with it. I'm going to look for things in the front end. Here's how I'm going to look for it. And this suggests to me, the one question mark there on the done line, makes some suggestions to me about maybe where the problems are. So let's look at some possible solutions. How much stuff are you sending from the back end? Do you really need all that? Don't send stuff you don't need. Like, for instance, do you need a DivX class object in JavaScript? JavaScript won't be able to do a darn thing with that. Don't do it. All you'll get is bracket object and wonder why. Because it knows nothing of those methods. Send the fields you need. Use a data grid widget. All right, the people who release data grid widgets and other JavaScript widgets and UI components make those things blazingly fast for you. We use DevExpress, which is really, really fantastic. It's got a lot of great UI widgets. And their data grid widget is screaming fast and super easy to use. You feed it a hash ref of data, an array of hash refs, and it just goes, here it is. And if you want, it'll take care of paging it for you, and you can send it a great big data set, and it doesn't mind at all. So use a good data grid widget instead of an HTML table. Then you're not spending time marking it up. Pre-format your dates in the back end. It's unlikely, in this case, that the creation of the JavaScript date object is the problem, unless you have a whole lot of dates you're dealing with. In this example, only the date of birth. So it's kind of unlikely that's the problem. But another thing you might do to increase your performance a bit is look at pre-formatting that in the back end if you've got the headroom back there and you don't in the front. Take care of your inputs. If someone just hits enter on that search box, what happens? Make sure that you know what's going to happen and that it's not going to throw every record on the table into that API. Because sure shooting, one of your users is going to do that. And it's not because they're dumb. It's because they're adventurous. We'll just call it that. They're clever, they're adventurous, and they will find new ways to make interesting mistakes if you let them. Right? Paging and limiting your results. Hey, if you're using Dibix class, you can use some helpers and get that done. It's really easy. And then you're only sending a little slice of data at a time. That may help. That's what you're doing. If you're really committed to doing the HTML table thing, then you definitely want to do that. Because an HTML table that's 9 screens long is probably not that useful. Improving your matching. How's your matching algorithm look in the back? If someone enters last name S**, and they will because they're users, what's it going to do? How sane is it going to be? Improving your back end matching may keep you out of trouble here. But the markup here leads us to think about those things, partly, and in fact really mostly, because of the question mark next to the done statement. Here's the potential problem. We're being sent a whole bunch of stuff to the browser. In some cases, what can we do about that? And maybe it's a solution you can implement solely on the back end and leave this code alone. But this has helped you find where to think about the code. Fair enough? Follow me? Okay. So I'll flick through these again. Okay, let's see some Perl. We're at the Perl conference, right? Let's see some Perl. Hey, this is a back-end search, and I'm going to search my item table with a null search, which means everything. And I want it ordered by, in this case, my primary key, the ID. And I have some result rows, and I'm going to loop over those result rows. And for each of the order line items, for each of those items, I want to total up the quantity ordered. And so I'm looking for a sales report. How many of every item have I sold? Ever. Oh, well, I think we see several problems here, yes? Let's start with this. All right, we're going to do an inner process because our database, I happen to know, is on the same hardware. But you see that potential memory hog under some circumstances. Oh, yeah, well, you're searching your entire items table. Well, if you're a company that makes 3 things, this is not a problem. How many manufacturers just make 3 things? Let's get real. All right, result rows, nothing big there. That's just initializing a variable. That's easy. For each item, let's T a loop. Oh, look, we've got another loop inside the loop. And for each one of those, because we didn't prefetch it up there at the top, we're going to have to do another database request and go out and get more stuff. Another inter-process communication. And we're going to get back for each of those items every order ever of that item. If you have 3 items and you take in a couple of orders a week because you're a small business, that's one thing. But if you're AC Delco with 70,000 unique parts for this year's model alone, and you sell to thousands of dealers around the country, this is going to overwhelm you that fast. You've made a mistake here, and it really quickly shows up just by adding some little markup out there. Well, let's see. Gosh, Neil has called me again and says, this is too slow. This route is really a hog. Well, it worked fine in testing, boss. Well, yes, but test is not the real world. He kindly tells me, reminding me once again that users are unpredictable. So I say, well, the first thing we could hack away here, that second request in that innermost loop where we're having to go and hit the database, that database isn't as efficient as it should be. It's not keyed right. It doesn't have enough indexes perhaps, and then maybe that's the problem. So let's do it this way. And I'm going to go over that loop, but instead of dealing with the objects and having to hit object methods, which are heavier weight, let's just pull some hashref elements out. So I change it and I say prefetch my order line items and return the result as a hashref. Might that be better? Perhaps. Let's mark it up. Okay, but look, the memory hog is still up there. Why? Because we still have 70,000 items on this year's model alone. And we sell to 9,000 dealers around the country. Oh. Now the loops look better because all we've got is a bunch of lightweight operations inside there. So, the loop is kind of okay. That's, yeah, we're hitting it a bunch of times, but yeah, it's all lightweight stuff. It's all the lightest possible stuff. So don't look there. You've done everything you can do inside that loop because all you have is plus signs. All you have is lightweight operations. Now you, clever being that you are, have attended my session tomorrow on Therbligs class Voodoo. I know you are the cleverest sort of person because you attend that session and you realized that after attending that session, you could do this instead. Make one request to the database, get back everything you want, including your totals, done. And let Postgres do all the work. All right, PostgreSQL was written by a whole bunch of people, many of whom are probably better coders than you are. That sounds like a bold statement. I know it to be true in my own case. Go look at the source. You'll find out real quick. There's somebody smarter than you. There's always someone smarter than you. And if they've written an application like PostgreSQL or MySQL or Oracle or whatever you're using for your database, using Therbligs class and letting the database do the heavy lifting of that addition removes the loop completely, and it makes it into one slightly heavier, see the plus sign? Inter-process communication. Or it might be a network black box if your database is on another server. So this gets a lot faster that way. And now we've got it really as fast as it's going to go and do the same thing it was doing. So then, but it's still too slow because we have 70,000 items on this year's model alone and we sell to 9,000 dealers. And so this is still a problem. So let's think about possible solutions. Using bare hash refs instead of objects to lighten your memory load. Now this is especially true if you're sending things out to the front end to put in a data grid. Sometimes your data grid objects in JavaScript won't do anything with an object. They want bare hash refs, so send it to them that way. They're not going to know what to do with the methods. Don't waste time sending it. Let the DB do the lifting. Hey, summing things, finding the minimum and maximum, doing things over ranges, it's good at that. If you're using a reasonably modern database and not SQLite, then, SQLite's great for small data sets. It's good for testing. But when you get to the real world and you're doing real world applications, you're going to be using something heftier. And that heftier thing is probably better at doing that kind of data collation than you can write in Perl. So let it. You might put a cache there that stores summary information, including total orders, say, by year or by month. And then instead of hitting all of the item orders, you hit the cache and then all the orders since then. Or maybe you change your functionality and say, I don't need to know how many I've sold of every item ever on this report. That doesn't make sense from a business perspective. What do I need to know if I'm making money this year? I need to know orders from this year. Change your search parameters to make it make more sense. Maybe I need to know all the things in this division, all the items in a certain group, all of a specific item, and only the orders for the last 2 years or the last 6 months. Changing the parameters may also help, but having a cache somewhere that lets you get that, hey, how many items total did we sell this last year? Because I'm going to go to a professional conference and stand up and brag about it. You want one number? Okay, fine. But have a cache somewhere to collect that stuff from time to time, maybe with a cron job at the end of the month that collates all that together and stores it in a record. Link it properly using the items ID as your foreign key, and you can get to that real fast. Databases are good at that stuff. All right, here's some final thoughts, and we'll have some time for questions and playing around with ideas. No Therblig is automatically bad. Even the heaviest weight one is not automatically a problem. Just make sure you're not hitting really heavy ones over and over and over inside a loop. Actual markup may not be necessary. Once you've done this a little while, if your IDE of choice, whether it's Vim or Visual Studio Code or whatever you're using, automatically does indentions, you're going to see your loops. You don't have to mark those up. Once you've done this a while, you know where the heavyweights are. You'll figure out who your hefty ones are. So you might not even need to write it down. But the markup is kind of a tool for learning how. You're developers, right? This is not a substitute for a developer's brain. Are you as tired as I am of hearing about how AI is going to replace all of us? You know, and the mass media and the mass hysteria machine that is the mass media has spun that canard out there for all of us to enjoy. And I just hate having to tell people over and over again, not in your lifetime, youngling. It's not going to replace you. It's not ever going to replace a brain that has figured out how to write code completely. Can it simplify the simple stuff? What was the goal of Perl? Make the hard stuff possible and make the easy stuff easier? Sure. The stuff we've done more than once, certainly. Because it'll find those things and go, oh yeah, I know how to do that. Somebody else figured it out. Yannick wrote a piece of code 20 years ago that knows how to do that, and I know about it here. I'll copy it and not give him credit. Sure, AI knows how to do that. But no system, no tool is a substitute for that thing you use to hold your ears apart. I'm not talking about your hairdo. I'm talking about your brain. We're all developers here. Let's use our brains for it. But this is a tool that I have found useful in my own coding. You may find it useful, and so I present it to you for your benefit. We have some time for questions and whatnot. Back up. Matt. Well, see, that's not the phase where I would be doing that in the first place. If I'm reviewing somebody else's PR, I'm probably marking it up in my head, if that at all. If that. And only then, if I know that this coder that I'm reviewing their work tends to write inefficient loops, for instance, then I might mark it up in my head. But odds are I'm not even going to bother at that point. Now, I might look for really obvious, glaringly obvious traps and send it back to them and say, this is potentially messy. Are you sure about that? And ask for them to, but even then, I'm not going to spend any time with markup in this case. Normally, my normal use case for this kind of methodology is on established code. And I have a copy of the repository on my laptop. And so I spin up the files that are calling that. Usually it's a dancer route. And the pieces and the methods that it's calling, and maybe the JavaScript template. And then I start marking it up if I need to find the hotspots. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Okay. I have not thought that far out there. I think it would be a good idea, to kind of do some rough sort of automation of, especially if for like more advanced IDEs like Visual Studio, where you could just say, Control Shift Alt M or something and mark it up, which sounds like an Emacs key entry, doesn't it? But, if you could just say, mark this code up with Therbligs. The thought has come to mind to write a paper or something, but I'm not in academia and there's no benefit to me to do that. But an automated tool for ripping out a quick markup here might be a good idea sometime. Thank you. That's a great idea. Abigail, you had your hand up. Exactly. It's the same kind of thing as Matt's last question. Why not just automate that? The only reason it's not automated is because I haven't automated it yet. Because I'm lazy. Oh, yeah. There's we just have not used that. That is not a tool we've used a whole lot in our shop. And in the previous places I've worked, that's not been something I've used. So I'm not as familiar and comfortable. But the benefit here is this is always going to be language independent, which is something that I do value in it, that I'm using the same tool across any number of languages, which I find. Right. And that's why I use it mostly in response to a support call that says, hey, this page is running slow. Why is it running slow? Then I start looking. Yeah. 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 Very messy code. You may not want to be able to run it inside of a framework whose black boxes you do not fully understand. Perhaps you don't want to do that. Running it inside a dance rep, would it even work, Jason? Right there. And we write Dancer 2 apps all day long. That's the only thing we do, basically. And so, yeah, it's not going to be necessarily pretty. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can warn yourself in advance. This could, with the tilde there, this might later be something that comes back to bite me. This might bite me in the future. We've got a bunch of comments in our current code and across, I don't know, 3 or 4 of our applications that say, rude form is rude. and the rest of my team knows if you want to search for, hey, when somebody enters a form and they don't enter a field in an optional field and they hit result and blank ends up in funny places, look for rude in the code, because that means there's a form handler there and you just need to add that field to your form handler that cleans up blank is not undef. Because that problem has come up over and over and over. Any other thoughts? Yeah, this isn't a substitute for a profiler. This is one tool that can do some profiling-like things. And you can use it up front if you're, especially if once you've gotten comfortable with that and learn in your head and you're writing code and you write this, you go, item search, wait a minute. This will fail. This will start screaming when, leave yourself a note that says, this might later. So then your teammates can look for, pig nose ? Yeah, you can start thinking about this once you kind of practice this a time or two on existing code and get used to the process of thinking about where your big bites are, where the big chunks are. You can look for these hotspots as you write. Save yourself a little time later. Okay, one final thought. Right. And for the longest time, I didn't actually have the markup's actually relatively recent in my head. I've been doing this kind of stuff fairly frequently for Clearbuilt for the last 4.5 years. I mean, pretty early on, we figured out that I know how to do that. And so Neil started throwing me those tasks, especially on the stuff that I wrote, sometime before, and then we put it in production, and then finally it gets to a hotspot, and then, yeah. So I got pretty good at this, and so only in the last 6-8 months, really, have I come up with a markup language to kind of assist with that and help kind of enumerate it so you can see the process that's out there. Yeah. I don't care. It's a black box to me. I don't care. That's kind of the black box point is I can't touch what's going on over there. There's just a note that this one's heavier than that one, right? Thank you all for your kind attention. I hope to see you tomorrow at the Therbligs class voodoo session. I know I will see some of you because, you've already told me so. Thank you for your time. Go in peace.